Beauty and the Beast Part 2. At last the beast entered from the garden. "Good evening, merchant. It's good of you to come as we agreed. And you, Beauty, are certainly a brave young woman. She must love you dearly, merchant, to have come." Beauty bowed her head in greeting. "How very frightening he is," she thought. "And yet his eyes are sad. He must be lonely living in this large palace all along." "We've come as you just like you asked," said the merchant. "I haven't been able to persuade my daughter to stay at home, but I please spare her, for I feel you will deal with her harshly." But the beast had no unkind words for either one of them. Instead, he asked, "Beauty, will you remain with me in my palace?" "Oh, yes, Lord, I will." "In this palace, you alone are the mistress. All will do your bidding, including myself. You may refer to me as Beast, for that's what I am. And I only ask that we speak the truth here." Turning to the merchant, who was astonished at the beast's gentleness toward his daughter, "Merchant, you shall stay all the night, but you must leave by morning. Take with you those 3 chests that you and your daughter may fill with gold to bring back to your family. Now I bid you good night." The beast bowed politely to Beauty and was gone. Again the merchant begged Beauty to reconsider, and she refused. So they stayed up till dawn, filling the chest with the gold and precious jewels. The more they filled the chest, the more room there was. "Surely the beast is making fools of us both. My horse will never be able to carry such tremendous weight," the merchant said. But in the morning the merchant's horse stood at the gate with all 3 chests tied to the saddle. Now at last it was time for the merchant to leave. Beauty kissed him goodbye, trying to conceal her tears. He finally set out, and in moments he was gone from view. The Beauty was alone. She walked slowly back into the palace and went to her room. She found the closets were filled with beautiful clothes. Her dresser spilled over with jewels of every kind. As she exchanged her shabby dress for a fine silk one, she thought, "The beast will be pleased to see me wearing his gifts." Then she set out to explore the palace. At the top of a long winding staircase she found a tower room. It was circular and filled with light. Every window looked out into the garden. In one corner was a large silver music box that played, when the lid was lifted, of a continuously changing melody. On the bookshelves there were books of every kind bound in the finest leather, and in a small gilt cage was a tiny red bird that sang to her. Beauty thought, "This is the most wonderful room in the palace. Poor beast, with all his wealth and love of beautiful things, he is wretched and lonely. Well, I will try to make him be happy." Each day Beauty returned to the tower. She read many of the books. Often she'd take the little bird from its cage, letting it fly free. "Little bird, you're like me," she said. The bird flew to her shoulder and rubbed its smooth beak gently against Beauty's cheek. Every evening Beauty would have her dinner before the fire, and the beast would join her. It was the only time she saw him. One of the first evenings in the palace, Beauty asked, "Where do you spend your days, Beast?" "Do not ask me, Beauty." "Please tell me what you do." The beast looked at her, and a great sorrow filled his face. But just as quickly his expression changed to anger. He raised his rough, fur-covered claws and answered, I prowl the woods for prey. I'm an animal, after all, my lady. I must kill for my meat. Unlike you, I cannot eat gracefully." Beauty was horrified. Her eyes filled with tears and she looked away. "How very sad," was all she could say. The beauty left her with an abrupt good night. Beauty ceased to ask questions that might hurt or embarrass the beast. At first she tried hard not to notice how frightening he looked. As time passed, she found him so kind that her fear eventually left her. "The palace is now yours, Beauty, and I'm your slave," the beast told her one night. During those evenings, he talked of many things, of magic, of the world. The beast knew many stories of foreign places, and Beauty loved to hear him tell stories. His stories were so vivid she felt like she were there herself. Beauty soon came to realize the beast was a magician as well. Often while telling a story, he'd wave his arms and a picture would appear before her eyes. The characters in the story would move around like real people, and when the tale was over, the players would bow and curtsy, then disappear. Many of the stories were funny, and Beauty and the Beast would laugh together until the Beast would remember he was a beast. Then he would end the story quickly, bidding her good night. Before he left, he would always ask, "Beauty, will you be my wife?" Beauty always replied the same way. "No, Beast, I'm sorry. Though you are kind to me and have treated me fairly, I can never be your wife because I don't love you." Then the Beast would leave Beauty, and she would want to cry for him. Beauty most of all looked forward to the nights when she went to bed. Her sleep was filled with dreams lovelier than those she had ever had before. They were always the same. She'd be in the garden or the palace near a shimmering pond. The air was filled with the scent of roses, and her little red bird would fly about her singing the sweetest song. And then a handsome prince would walk by and sit beside her. He seemed familiar to Beauty, though she knew she had never seen him. Someday, Beauty, will all be together, always. But then the dream would change, and he'd be gone, and in his place would be, she'd hear this woman's voice speaking to her. "Look deep into others, Beauty, to find your happiness." Beauty would think, what does that mean? Why can't my prince be with me now? Those dreams melded into her days at the palace, and she'd look for her prince in the garden and by the pond, but she never found him. Yet in her dreams he would tell her of his life. "When I was a boy, I was very vain and quite proud. My palace was filled with servants," the beast said. "Everyone honored me and did my bidding. One day an ugly old woman came begging at my palace gate. I showed her no pity. She was so ugly. The sight of her did not move me, and I sent her away without food or money. As she left, she warned that I would spend the rest of my life wandering around in my fine palace without a friend until someone could find beauty in me. I laughed at her, but when I returned to my palace, I found it empty. I've been alone ever since." When Beauty awoke, she'd tell herself it was just a dream. But if it was, then how could she ever set the prince free? One night after having dined with the beast, he again asked her the same question he always asked, and again she said as kindly as she could, "No, Beast, I'm sorry. I can never be your wife because I do not love you." But when he left her, the beast seemed sadder than ever. Beauty went to her room, eager to dream of her prince, but he didn't appear. She stood before the pond calling, but instead an old woman approached. "Your prince cannot return to you, Beauty. Since he has failed to make you his wife, you must not really love him." Then she was gone. But I do, said Beauty. Now Beauty only had the memory of the prince to comfort her. The next morning, when Beauty entered the tower, she found a small oval mirror. She looked in it. There was her father, lying ill, with her sisters and her brothers gathered around him. That night at dinner, Beauty told the Beast about the mirror. It's a magic mirror, he told her. If one is pure of heart, one can see into it. If you have seen your father there, he must be truly ill. Oh, please, can I go see him? If I can only just see him for a little while, I know he'd be better. You're a good daughter, Beauty. I cannot refuse you anything, for I'm your slave. Take the mirror tomorrow and simply will yourself by your father's side. Your wish will be granted, but please remember your poor Beast who loves you and return to me in 3 weeks. Well, Beauty was overjoyed. Still, when it came time for the Beast to leave her, he again asked her to marry him. She could only say no. Goodbye, Beauty. Remember your promise. You're going to return in 3 weeks, for I will not live without you, said the Beast. That night, Beauty dreamed again of the garden and the shimmering pond. She looked for the prince, but he was not there. Instead, she saw the old woman. How blind you are! I'd hoped you would know that happiness comes from seeing what does not always lie on the surface. Some things are not on the surface at all, she said. The next day, Beauty looked into the magic mirror, wishing with all her heart to be with her father. Just like that, a handsome black horse, which would lead her to the palace, called out from outside. Taking the mirror with her, she rushed to the gates of the palace, and they were off. The black horse galloped so fast, Beauty barely felt the ground beneath them. In what seemed like a moment, she was back at her father's home. Though her father was now very rich, thanks to the Beast, he chose to remain in the country. When Beauty arrived, he indeed was very ill. Although he had servants to tend to his needs, they could not take Beauty's place. As soon as she was there caring for him, he began to recover rapidly. When her sisters saw how well Beauty looked, they were envious. Huh, why is she so lucky? They asked each other. Though the two had married well, they still felt resentful that their simple little sister lived in a beautiful palace like a queen, even if she did have to share it with a Beast. They decided to urge Beauty to stay. She could look after their father much better than the servants, and he was doing so well since her return. Certainly the Beast would understand that her father needed her much more than he. On and on they connived, succeeding in making Beauty agree to stay longer than she had said. Later they giggled, thinking how angry the Beast would be for her disobeying him. Beauty worried about the Beast, but she could not bring herself to leave, for her father was so happy to have her with him. After a time, Beauty had another dream. There again was the palace garden and the pond. Winter was setting in, and the leaves were falling, and the sky was dark. On the ground, lay the Beast, looking quite dead. Beauty woke, chilled and filled with dread. My poor Beast, how awful I've been to him. Well, how could I have betrayed my promise when he's been so kind? She said goodbye to her father and immediately held the mirror before her, wishing to be back at the palace. Just like that, the black horse appeared, and again the two galloped with great speed to the palace. At the pond was her Beast, just as in her dream. He looked quite dead. Beauty knelt beside him, cradling his head in her arms. My poor Beast, this is my fault for being so heartless. I've repaid your love with my own blindness and selfishness. Please get better. If you do, I swear, I'll be your wife. I do love you. The Beast was not dead, but only weak with misery from the loss of his Beauty. As Beauty spoke, he stirred and moved his great head. Before Beauty's eyes, he began to grow stronger, which with each breath he took, his beastly appearance started to fade. Hearing his heart still beating, Beauty took some water from the pond and wet his dry lips. But she pulled back in surprise, for the beast was gone, and in his place, the prince from her dreams lay in her arms. "You've released me from my enchantment, Beauty. If you'll still consent to marry me, although I am no longer your beast, I'll promise always to love you. Now at last I'm free to tell you the old woman was really a fairy in disguise sent to test me. I failed, but she was kind enough to put up a whole palace and a magical spell until I could find you to redeem me. Say you'll marry me. Say you'll be my queen." And the Beauty understood the mystery of her dreams. The prince and the beast were one, and her love had saved them both from their enchantment. The palace sang out with rejoicing. All the servants, noblemen, and fine ladies were freed from the spell of invisibility, and a great feast was prepared for the wedding. So the prince and Beauty were married, and they lived with love and happiness. As for her sisters, well, you can imagine just how envious they felt of their little sister's happiness. And Beauty and her prince lived. The end.